A three-step method. Okay, so I'm writing a computer book. And I say to myself, how on earth am I going to write down how I teach? And then I realized I should just write down what I say, which is exactly what the book is. In the beginning, I'm talking a lot, but once people get onto the computer, I literally asked myself, how do I teach people how to visit a website or how to copy and paste? And I wrote down exactly what I said, and what I found out was it's step by step, and usually no action takes more than 4 steps. On occasion, there's some things that take more than 4, but even an attachment only takes about 4 steps. So I tried to make it as few steps as possible, as clear as they could be, and then I realized that when I taught, what I would do is I would show the students up on the screen the steps, I would have the students do the steps, and then the third time around they wrote down how they did them. So I suggest to you that when you're teaching or when you're practicing something yourself, do it 3 times. By the end of 3 times, it's starting to sink in. What we want to do is have these actions that we take on the computer be habitual. That's what we're heading for, right? Because driving a car, in the beginning, I told this story, Patty will have heard all these stories. When I first learned how to, I grew up in Old Glen, Connecticut, and Mr. Bickford was our driver's ed teacher. And when he drove, I drove around Old Glen for an hour. We drove back into the school parking lot, and Mr. Bickford said to me, "So Abby, how was that?" And I said to him, I don't remember being in the car. Like, I was so nervous. I'd been driving for an hour and I had no memory of it whatsoever. And that's exactly what happens to people on the computer. So they have their first lesson, or you learn something new with digital photography or whatever you're working on, and you get it right once. And then, surprise, surprise, you go back a month later and you have no idea how you did it, and you're reinventing the wheel over and over again. So we go back to that notebook that's always next to your computer. You're going to make this marvelous revelation about how to do something once. In this case, write it down right away. But then you're going to follow those instructions 2 more times. So it's 3 times in total. And what will happen is you'll also perfect those instructions as you go along. The first time you write it down, you may discover you missed a step. You don't want to look at those instructions a month from now and wonder why they don't work because you didn't test them after you wrote them down the first time. So think of it that you're always doing it 3 times. That's going to ensure that it's started to stick in your head and that you've got the instructions correctly. I will sometimes write down the instructions for my students. You know, some of the stuff, it's in the book. You could have them just mark the pages, but I think it's also helpful for students to write down their own instructions. It's like they're making their own manual that they can look back on. I think there's something about building confidence with that and sort of having empowerment from it that I think is effective.